Okay, we're gonna start up with the second portion of this video lecture, and one of the things in that I've come to find in programming is that if there was just one way to do it, one way to, have private fields and public methods, and that was the only way. You learn that way, and that might be a little bit easier. But there's actually multiple ways to modify these variables. And there's also multiple ways to access these variables. Mutators and accessors are one method of doing that task. And we demonstrated that in the last video, how to write public methods to access private fields. But there's another technique. Now, I would even go as far as saying, to the best of my knowledge, accessors and mutators, I learned them in another language. I didn't learn them in C#. So they're probably, I learned them in Java. And so I use them more in Java than I do in C#. Because I can collapse these. There's another thing, right? There's another thing besides a method that can do the same work. And in C#, it's a little bit easier to do because this takes practice, getting used to how to write. And you might not even have this logic. In its most simple form, it's this. But this still takes practice. How do you write this? What does this mean? How does this work? Like, it takes, the first time I could write these and not understand them because I could follow a pattern, and that's what I did. And you can follow a pattern and not understand them. It takes a little bit more to understand them. And it takes practice. That's all I'm saying. It takes practice to understand these. I get that because I've been through it. But there's another way that might be easier that's not a method. So we got fields and we got methods. We're going to introduce something new. This is called a property. And I guess the first thing worth saying is that a property can do or does the same thing as a mutator and the same thing as an accessor. And so going back to what I was saying originally, if there was only one way of doing it, it might be a little bit easier. But there are multiple ways, and some ways are easier than other ways. In my opinion, a property is easier than an accessor and a mutator. And so let's learn to write properties. And since we're primarily focusing on age, we're gonna write a property for, I'll tell you what, I'll do it for skin color. Because we already did one for methods for age, so I'll write a property for skin color. So I'll say prop, and you notice there's a tab option. I say prop tab, prop tab, and it'll autofill for you. But I'm going to hand write this out so you can see it. Public is how you access the property. It's our access modifier. Because we're working with skin color on this property, I'm going to mark it as its return data type is the next thing. Well, it's going to return a string, just like your accessor would return a piece of data. And our property, by convention, this is a naming convention, very common, is going to have the same name as our field, but we're just going to capitalize the first letter. open and close curly braces. So we've created a property for skin color, and you can tell the difference in that this is a field because it's got the lowercase s, and this is a property. There's none of these, by the way. This would be a method. There's no parentheses here. It's a property. Now, there's 2 blocks of code in a typical property. A get block and a set block. Well, you might guess that the set block, what would the set block do? What work would it do? Not everyone at once. It would set the value of skin color, right? Much like the mutator. And the get block would read the data, much like the accessor. So let's write a get block. It's get, boom, boom, set. Okay, so now we have 2 blocks of code inside of our property. Our get block is going to return the field. Return the field. And our set block, modify the field. Okay, so how do we modify? What? Yep, skin color equals. Now this is kind of the one part that I scratched my head a little bit. It's a keyword. You have to say the field equal to a keyword called value. Because you have to assume they're going to pass a value in. And I'll show you how to use this property. Okay? Now, just like in our mutators, we could say, you know, if value, which is whatever they're trying to set the skin color to, if value equals, you know, blue, we know there's no, well, I guess people don't have blue skin, right? Okay, we're not going to allow it. If they do, we're not going to allow. Well, then we're getting into problems there. But you see what I'm doing here. We have the same data validation as we did in our mutators. So if value equals blue, we could say are you sure? You know, else. But again, just to show you, in our set block, we can do the same thing as we could in a mutator. To keep it simple, I'm just going to do this. Okay. Now, I'm going to go back up here. A property does the same thing as a mutator and the same thing as an accessor. Also known as a smart field. So a property is also known as a smart field. It can be smart, right? Because we can have logic in here to modify how it can be modified and how it can be accessed. Whereas a field, it's dumb. You just put data in, you take data out, and here you can have logic that determines those things. Let's go back to our main method. Now let's do P1 dot. Now you see the new value? Look at the symbols. The equals has this symbol here representing a method. Get age represents a method. There's a little wrench. Now we have a wrench for skin color. And this is how we set a property. Equals to. white. P1 dot skin color equals. Oop, we already have P1. P2 dot skin color equals brown. Okay? So what are these doing? They're doing the same thing. Ultimately, they are setting these fields. That's the ultimate goal. They're just, one of these is doing them through a method. The other one is doing it through a property. If I do a console.writeLine, P1 dot, so we've put data in, but on the write line we need to get data out. All you have to do is say P1 dot skin color. No parentheses needed because it's a property. This accesses the skin color that we set up here. Do the same thing for P2. Let's debug, start debugging. You can see we set the age using the mutator. We set the age using the mutator. Okay, now we're hitting the skin color. It's going to go into the class. Oh, it just skips right over. It didn't even go into it. I was expecting something different. But it's set. I expected it to go in the class. It didn't do it. That's okay. We set the skin color for P1, set the skin color for P2. We get the age using the accessor. We get the other age using the accessor. It writes the skin color, writes the skin color. Let's see if we pull this up, put that in the middle of the screen so you can see. We've effectively set the age and got the age using the methods. We set the skin color and got the skin color using the property, same with P2. Okay? Main point here. Properties can do the same thing that we learned to do with our methods. And in C#, properties are, in my opinion, easier to use and more common. Now here's where it gets easier. Because this is a property. I'm going to introduce something, a different, an easier property. Okay, and I call it the easier property. The textbook definition of what it's called AutoImplemented Property. Now, okay, I want you guys to think of this scenario. Right now, we've got these fields, and we've got 3 of them. And for each field, we're having to write some sort of programming logic on how to do 2 things: how to get the field and how to set the field. How to set the field or how to get the field, right? Two purposes: putting data in and getting data out securely. But imagine if there were 50 fields. What if there were 100 fields? What if there were many, many, many fields? You'd have to write a whole lot of repetitive code for all these different fields. So what it boils down to is that in the past, these guys are going, you know what? We've got these fields and we're having to write all these accessors and mutators and we're writing all these properties. Let's shorten it up. Let's make it easier on ourselves so that it can all be done with less code. And that's where auto-implemented properties comes in. Let's think of another field, right? A person has a hair color, skin color, and age. I'm just going to say a height. Okay, and because you could be like 6'2", even though it's 6.2 is it's not 2/10, right? It's not 2/10 of a, but I'm just gonna make it a double. No, I'm making an int for your number like 75 inches tall. Okay, I'm gonna make it an int. I'm gonna hit prop, tab. Here's your auto. This is an auto implemented property right here. Except for the property, we're gonna call it height. So what all does this do? This is shorthand. This is shorthand. Not only, and this is really important, not only does it create all of this, right? See the skin color that had 2 blocks of code? Okay? It creates all of that, and most importantly, you have to realize it also creates the field. So when I have a property called height that's auto-implemented, I do not need, this is important, do not need to create the field, and for, they call this the backing field. The backing field are just your fields, okay? It's backing because it's behind the property. You do not need to create the backing field that way. Notice I have height auto-implemented property. We have a get block, we have a set block. Now over here, it's done. It's simple. It's shorthand. Let me make sure to save it. Then over here, I could say p1 dot. Now I have a new property called height. Okay, so if I say p1 dot height equals 75 inches, p2 dot height equals 65 inches. P1 dot height. So then we access it. P2 dot height.
So you type prop tab.
I typed prop tab, and then I gave my property a name, which was back over here, and the name I gave it was height. Now it's return. This is its return data type. It has to be the data type that you need this to be, right? So since it's a height, it's a whole number. I just need an integer. But if I wanted, 72.5, inches, change it to a double or whatever you need it to be. Now, just because I think you've gotten used to seeing this execute, I'm going to say debug, start without debugging. And there you can see the 2 people's age, their skin colors, and their heights. This was using methods. This was using regular old properties, or what they also call smart fields. And this is auto-implemented properties, which is shorthand. As if that wasn't enough, there's one more way to set the fields. Okay, but I don't think we're gonna talk about that right away. Okay, I just wanted to introduce properties. Going back here, if you read this, we got a regular property. It says 2 blocks of code in a typical property, and I use the word typical. Okay, but all properties aren't typical. And I said a get block and a set block. Well, there are scenarios where you might not set the values inside of a property. And so you get rid of the set block. If you were to get rid of the set block, now our code's not going to run because right now we're using the set block. But just as a demonstration, I'll say some properties do not contain set blocks and are therefore called read-only properties. Does that make sense? Why you would call it a read-only property? It just gets the data. So you might say, Mr. G, how do you then set the data? Well, there's multiple ways to set the data. You know how to set the data with properties. We're not setting with a property, so maybe you set the data with a method. Maybe you set it with a constructor, which we haven't talked about constructors yet. Not the point. The data gets set somewhere else. The property is only meant to read. Therefore, it only has a get block, doesn't have a set. So I'm going to Control Z out of this. I just wanted to show you that. But to get our code to compile again, we need the set block in here because it uses that. So now you can see that will compile. Okay. That's, if we're looking at our book as it is today on the 26th of 2016, right? We don't have a newer book if you're watching this in the future. We've gotten through 300, yeah, 20 or so plus pages through these first two videos. So I'm going to stop here for today and we'll pick the rest up tomorrow.